Okay, so imagine that you want to manufacture the perfect global pop star. Train them in subterranean performance academies for 6 non-negotiable years before they ever see a live microphone. Hire 16 Swedish songwriters to craft a 3-minute chorus. And then pray to the algorithmic gods that an audience of 10 million teenagers buys 4 distinct physical variants of the exact same compact disc, just to collect a set of shiny plastic photo cards. The initial capital outlay per debuting group routinely tops $3 million before a single note of music streams on Spotify. The odds of breaking even on that initial investment sit at roughly 5%. Industry analysts put the total failure rate for newly launched agencies somewhere between 90 and 95% within their first 3 years of operation. Sounds like a business plan concocted by a gambling syndicate with a taste for synchronized choreography. And for the vast majority of South Korea's 3,000 registered entertainment agencies, that is precisely what it is. The survival of a select few megacorporations masks a structural reality that looks less like Motown and more like high-yield venture capital operating with human inventory. To understand why most K-pop companies end up in liquidation, you have to realize that this entire industry was built inside a domestic economic vacuum. Following the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the South Korean government made a calculated macroeconomic pivot. If heavy industry and manufacturing could be wiped out by currency fluctuations, the state would export culture. They funded digital infrastructure, subsidized content exports, and established the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism with a dedicated bureau for popular music. But the domestic market of 51 million people was never big enough to support the sheer volume of capital being poured into these companies. The entire business model was engineered from day one on a terrifying assumption: go global instantly or go bankrupt slowly. Here's how the cash actually moves through the machine, and why the math breaks down so fast for everyone who isn't named Hybe, SM, IG, or JIP. Before an idol group ever performs on a music show, the agency must absorb the traineeship expense. This is an off-balance sheet accumulation of costs that includes room, board, vocal coaching, dance instruction, language lessons, media training, and frequently cosmetic procedures. For a 6-member group, training costs run between $50,000 and $100,000 per member per year. Multiply that by 4 years of development, add a minimum of $500,000 for a debut music video, another $300,000 for initial press campaigns, and the company is $4 million in the red on launch day. Under the traditional trainee debt contract system, the agency attempted to recoup these upfront costs directly from the artist's initial earnings. When revenue came in, the agency took its distribution cut, applied the remaining funds toward clearing the accumulated trainee debt, and paid the artist zero until the balance hit zero. But in 2009, the Fair Trade Commission stepped in to curb these so-called slave contracts, limiting agreements to 7 years and standardizing cost structures. This shifted the ultimate downside risk right back onto the agency's balance sheet. If a group debuts and fails to capture market share within their first 2 comeback cycles, a window of about 18 months, that $4 million investment is a dead asset. There is no secondary liquidation market for an unsuccessful pop group. You cannot sell the choreography to a scrap yard. The true revenue architecture of K-pop is deeply counterintuitive to anyone accustomed to Western music economics. Streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music generate pennies that are promptly split among songwriters, publishers, and distributors. For a mid-tier agency, streaming pays the light bill, nothing more. Domestic Korean streaming platforms like Melon yield even smaller per-stream payouts. The real profit margins, the ones that keep the lights on, live in 3 high-margin verticals: physical album sales, global touring, and direct-to-consumer merch monetization. Consider the physical album, an asset that the rest of the global music business abandoned 15 years ago. K-pop agencies resurrected the CD not as an audio format, but as a randomized collectible trading system. By inserting exclusive, randomized photo cards into album packaging, agencies incentivized core fans to purchase 10, 50, or even hundreds of copies of the same release to complete a collection or secure a ticket to an in-person fan sign event. Korea Customs Service data showed physical album exports hitting a record $290 million in recent years. For a top-tier agency, a physical album that costs less than $3 to manufacture sells for $20, yielding gross margins exceeding 60%. Then comes the scale comparison, where the disparity between the top 1% and the remaining 99% becomes staggering. In a single fiscal year, Hybe, the corporate leviathan behind BTS, reported consolidated revenues crossing 2 trillion Korean won, or roughly $1.5 billion, boasting operating profit margins that rivaled mid-sized software companies. A single stadium tour by an elite group can pull in $80 million in gross ticket sales, backed by an auxiliary merchandise machine that sells $50 branded lightsticks manufactured for $6 in Shenzhen. Analyst Mark B., who spent years tracking Korean entertainment equities, noted that the top 4 agencies consistently capture over 80% of total physical album sales and nearly 90% of total international touring revenue. The remaining 3,000 registered agencies are left fighting over a fraction of a market that cannot sustain their baseline operational burn rates. This concentration of capital creates a catastrophic failure mode for the independent agency. Because the market expects immaculate visual output, hyper-polished production value, and relentless content output, a small agency cannot simply launch a cheap group. The barrier to entry is fixed at the top by corporate conglomerates with infinite balance sheets. When a small agency attempts to match this production value, they rely on short-term debt, private equity loans, or personal collateral pledged by founders. The breaking point usually arrives quietly during the third comeback cycle. An agency spends $600,000 producing a mini-album, renting LED screens, hiring international producers, and buying airtime on music broadcasts. If the album sells 12,000 copies instead of the required 150,000 needed to service the operational overhead, the firm experiences an instant liquidity crunch. Salary payments to staff halt. The group enters an indefinite hiatus, the industry euphemism for operational paralysis. The artists remain locked in 7-year exclusive contracts with a firm that can no longer afford to book them studio time, while the agency's management spends its days ducking calls from third-party music video production houses and staging companies. When the bubble bursts for an agency, it rarely ends in a clean, orderly Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It disintegrates into a legal crossfire of contract termination lawsuits, unpaid vendor liens, and corporate restructurings that leave hundreds of young performers stranded in career limbo. The system was designed to manufacture perfection at scale, but it runs on financial assumptions so aggressive that a single underperforming single can erase a decade of capital accumulation. What survives is a corporate landscape increasingly controlled by consolidated media entities and platform monopolies that view the music itself merely as low-cost, top-of-funnel content to drive engagement on proprietary fan community apps like Weverse. The small, independent agency owner who dreamed of discovering the next global phenomenon finds himself squeezed out by a market that demands the balance sheet of an investment bank just to get a song onto the charts. The lights on the stage stay bright, the choreography remains synchronized to the millisecond, and the photo cards keep shipping by the million. But beneath the flashbulbs, the math remains merciless. The factory keeps running. The write-down didn't stop.